Hello everyone, my name is Clances and welcome to the Iron Bars, my YouTube channel where I speak all things true crime. So in today's case, I'm going to be talking about the kidnap and murder of Leigh Matthews. This one, I remember it so well because I was stunned. Many South Africans were stunned. It gripped us because the crime that was committed was uncommon to South Africans, and that is a crime of kidnap for ransom. I remember before we went to bed at night, we would kneel down and we would pray for Leigh Matthews' safe return to her beloved family, and we also pray that the perpetrator gets caught so that this crime never happens again in our country. So without further ado, let's get into this story. So Donovan Moodley was born in 1980 in Alberton, South Africa. He was born to Stephen and Mary Moodley, and he has a sister by the name of Michelle. He also had a girlfriend by the name of Yashika Singh. I hated when I don't find the birth date as well as the month of the perpetrator, because I always get intrigued about the zodiac sign as well, because for some reason at the back of my mind I always hope that the person is not a Cancer, because Cancers, as far as I know, we don't commit heinous crimes. If there is a Cancer that commits heinous crimes out there, we don't claim you. So before I go on, let me draw you a picture of South African demography so you get to understand some few things. So in South Africa, the population is divided in about 4 categories. You have black people that makes 80% of the population, and then you're going to have white people that make about 10% of the population, and then you're going to have Indians that is of Indian descent with about 6% of the population, and then we would have the colored community, or what other parts of the world will call biracial or mixed race. They make about 1 to 3% of the population. So Donovan Moodley comes from the Indian descent population. And that plays a very major role in this story because it is what gets him caught at the end of the day. So this story starts on the 9th of July 2004 at the parking lot of Bond University. So now Bond University is an Australian university that had a campus in Sandton, Morningside of Johannesburg, and this Bond University was attended by children that came from wealthy families. So on the 8th of July 2004, Leigh Matthews celebrated her 21st birthday. Yes, Leigh Matthews is a Cancer. So Leigh Matthews was described as humble, friendly, and treated everybody with kindness. So on her birthday, her mom, her dad, and her sister, and few chosen friends went to Cyril Dean at a Chinese restaurant to celebrate Leigh Matthews' 21st birthday. However, Leigh had planned a very big 21st birthday party with her closest friends at a Wit club, and her birthday party was themed the Pirates of the Caribbean. Good one, girl. So while they were having dinner at the Chinese restaurant, Leigh Matthews' mom and dad presented her with a very luxurious Tanzanite stone ring, which cost about 30,000 rand. So of course, the Matthews family were wealthy. They lived in a posh suburb of Fourways that is not too far from Sandton. Leigh Matthews' father was a businessman. I believe he owned an information technology company, and it was quite successful. So after the small private birthday party for Leigh Matthews, the family went home and they retired to bed. Unfortunately, that would be the last time they went to bed together as a happy family, because on the following day, on the 9th of July, Leigh Matthews would be kidnapped. So if you are not aware, in July, South Africa is in the middle of winter, so it gets really cold here in Johannesburg. So on the 9th of July, Leigh Matthews get up out of bed, she takes her bath, and she prepares for college. And on this particular day, she wears a blue jean, black leather jacket because it was a cold morning, and so she headed to college. So when Leigh Matthews went to college the following day, she did not wear her Tanzanite ring. Tells you a lot about her, because many girls who are 21-year-old, they would wear their rings and flash it around for all to see that her parents bought her a very expensive ring. But for Leigh Matthews, all she did, she took the ring and put it in a back jean pocket and went to school. So like I said, Bond University was based in Morningside, Santon, where all the wealthy kids had attended. Unfortunately, Bond University since closed its doors at the end of 2004. Something to note, Bond University was a very secured campus. Basically, students carried student cards that they had to produce, and visitors had to sign in order for them to be admitted into the campus. It's a typical setting here in South Africa for any buildings, whether it's a corporate building or an apartment building or a factory or university or school. That's how they operate. Students produce student cards, and visitors have to sign in. So on the 9th of July, Leigh Matthews produces her student cards to the security and she proceeds to park at the parking lot where she usually park at. So on this particular day, Leigh Matthews had been invited to a birthday party of a friend that evening. So she had planned with some of her friends to meet up at 11 a.m. That is little after classes were done at a nearby shopping center. So basically, Bond University was pretty close proximity with a shopping center. So many students, they would leave the campus and go to the shopping center to buy things, to buy food or to hang out there before classes or after classes. So Leigh had planned with her friends to go buy gifts for the friend that they were going to be attending her birthday party later in the evening. So after Leigh Matthews had parked her car and about to go and attend classes, she realized that she accidentally took her mother's credit card with her. So she calls her mother and arranged to meet with her just about 10 o'clock a.m. that particular morning to give her credit card in case her mom may want to use it. It turns out the mother indeed was going to use the credit card to buy some few things. I'm supposing some of the things were to prepare for Leigh Matthews' birthday party on the weekend. So come 10 o'clock a.m., Sharon Matthews, Leigh's mother, arrives at the parking lot as planned with Leigh, but unfortunately when she got there, she did not see her daughter there. So while Sharon was waiting at the parking lot for her daughter Leigh, she decided to call Leigh, but Leigh would not pick up. She sends Leigh a text, but Leigh does not respond to the text. But anyways, she decided, let me continue waiting. Maybe she's still held up in class. So Sharon began asking around if they have seen Leigh, and some friends mentioned that they saw Leigh walking towards the parking lot around 10 a.m. Some eyewitnesses even said they did see Leigh Matthews speaking to a man they did not recognize. So Sharon decided to wait a little while longer, assuming that Leigh is still stuck in class. However, Sharon would call Leigh's phone every 5 minutes. Unfortunately, the phone would just ring unanswered. Eventually, Leigh's phone is answered, but on the other side, it is not Leigh Matthews, but a man's voice. So the man proceeds to answer the phone and tell Sharon that he has a daughter, he kidnapped her, and of course, Sharon Matthews thinks this is a joke and she laughs it off. Leigh is just being silly, playing a prank on her with her friends. However, the man on the other side gets angry at Sharon and then he proceeds to tell her that if you are not going to do exactly what I'm about to tell you, I will not hesitate to shoot and kill your daughter. And that is when Sharon realized this is not a prank, it is real. And so she calls her husband Rob to tell him somebody has answered Leigh's phone, and this is what he said. Of course, Rob, panicking, calls Leigh's phone, and once again, a man answers the phone. And then he proceeds to tell Rob Matthews that he is demanding 300,000 Rand in order for him to release Leigh. I can just imagine what must have gone through these people's minds. Their daughter is being kidnapped. 300,000 Rand is asked of them to release her. Of course, as a parent, you are going to do everything in your power to ensure that your daughter is returned safely. At this point in time, money is not a priority, it's human life, and that human life happens to be your child. And as I was reading this story, I was thinking about Leigh, what must have been going through her mind, a fellow student doing this to her. So the kidnapper proceeds to tell Rob Matthews that he should not involve the police, and he would know if he would involve the police, and if indeed he involved the police, he is going to kill Leigh. So in a huge panic, Rob Matthews goes to two branches of Standard Bank and withdraws 300,000 rand. So after Rob Matthews has withdrawn the 300,000 rand in cash, he proceeds to call a private investigation company, and he arranged to meet with them at a gas station so that they can discuss a strategy on how they are going to drop off this money and then get Leigh back. So the private investigator and Rob Matthews arranged to meet at a filling station along William Nicol Drive and discuss further the plans on how they are going to execute in dropping off this money. However, the private investigator advises Rob Matthews to involve the police. And indeed, Rob Matthews complied, and 30 minutes later, the police arrived at the same filling station where Rob and the private investigator were at, and they listened to Rob Matthews' story about the kidnap of his daughter. However, the superintendent that was there, I think his name was Skipper, advises Rob Matthews to call the kidnapper, tell him that he does have the money. However, it's not 300,000 rand, but 50,000 rand. So Rob Matthews called his phone, and once again, this man on the other end answers the phone, and Rob Matthews tells the kidnapper that he only has 50,000 rand. He could not get the 300,000 because it was short notice. So if he could give him some more time in order to collect the remaining 250,000 rand. Of course, the kidnapper was not hoping to get 50,000 rand. Grumbly, he agrees to take the 50,000 rand, and then he says, fine, the rest I will get it later. So after the phone call with Rob Matthews, the kidnapper gives Leigh the phone to call her mother. So Leigh calls her mother and lets her mother know that she is fine, she's unharmed, but begs her to get the money and give to this man, and also begs her parents not to call the police because this guy is serious about harming her. At a later stage, Sharon would say that Leigh sounded exhausted. She also sounded terrified, but at first she sounded as though she was drugged, but she later realized that she had been crying a lot and she must have been exhausted and terrified. Like the typical greedy person, the kidnapper keeps calling Rob every single minute because he was arranging how the money was going to be dropped and what signs that he should look out for in order for the kidnapper to know this is Rob and do the drop-off. So the drop-off point was going to be the R55A off ramp. Basically, it's a bridge near Grasmere Toll Plaza. And the drop-off time was 8 p.m. that evening. Indeed, Rob Matthews drove to R55-8 off-ramp near Grasmere Toll Plaza at 8 p.m. with the 50,000 rand in an envelope, which was placed at the back seat of his vehicle, and a policeman was also hidden at the back of the car, which made Rob Matthews really uncomfortable having a policeman hidden in his car, considering the fact that the kidnapper made it clear to him no police must be involved. So about a kilometer towards the drop-off point, Rob Matthews became really uncomfortable. He stopped the car near a filling station and asked the policeman to get out of the car, because he was fearing if the kidnapper saw the policeman, he was going to send a signal to his fellow kidnappers and kill his daughter. Fortunately, the policeman did comply and got out of the car, and Rob Matthews proceeded to drive to the drop-off point at 8 p.m. as indicated by the kidnapper. Of course, a terrified father for his daughter, Rob Matthews drove past the drop-off point. The kidnapper then realized that Rob Matthews had just passed him. He calls Rob and asks him in a very angry tone, why the hell did he pass him? What is going on? Of course, Rob Matthews tells the kidnapper, I am so sorry. I am so scared that I was not particularly paying attention. I must have passed the drop-off point. So he did a U-turn and drove back to the drop-off point. The interesting part that you need to note in this story is that While the kidnapper was angry at Rob Matthews for passing the drop-off point, he spoke in an accent that Rob Matthews recognized. Rob Matthews, when he returned to the drop-off point, he flashed his lights 3 times as he was instructed by the kidnapper, so the kidnapper would know that this is Rob. So while Rob Matthews had parked at the drop-off point, he saw a figure that was coming towards his car and knocked on his window and then demanded that Rob Matthews throw the envelope on the ground, of which Rob Matthews did. And then the kidnapper tells Rob Matthews to drive. And so Rob does exactly that. He drives off, but he does not speed off. He just drives slowly, and then he awaits a phone call by the kidnapper to tell him where he should pick up his daughter. Unfortunately, the kidnapper does not call back, so Rob Matthews drives around in the hope that the kidnapper will call him and let him know where to pick up his daughter. That call, unfortunately, did not happen 50 minutes after he had dropped off the money. So Rob Matthews decides to call Leigh's phone once again, but unfortunately, Leigh's phone was turned off. Rob proceeded to call about 6 more times, but unfortunately, Leigh's phone was still off. So there was no communication at all between him and the kidnapper. So he had no idea what is going on, whether he should go home or continue hanging around until the kidnapper calls him and let him know where he can pick his daughter up. Unfortunately, that call never came. And that is when Rob Matthews started to fear the worst. So Rob Matthews reports back to the police and the private investigators, and immediately the South African police dispatches a task team of 10 policemen. And they also set up a joint operation office where they were going to set up telephones for tips and things of that nature, so that people can call in case they did see Leigh Matthews wandering around somewhere in Grasmere Toll Plaza area, as well as Lenasia and the neighboring townships. The Joint Operations Center was placed in the Johannesburg Central Police Station. Remember, in my previous case, Central Police Station, NNS Mate. So the task team also had specially trained negotiators, and the private investigators were also added to add manpower. So on Saturday the 10th, which was supposed to be Leigh Matthews' Pirates of the Caribbean 21st birthday party, the Matthews family, instead of celebrating Leigh's 21st birthday, instead they were in front of cameras and about to announce the kidnap of Leigh Matthews. On this particular day, the Matthews family were surrounded by media houses of every kind, and they made the announcement about the kidnap of their daughter. In the press conference, Rob Matthews tells the media that the kidnapper told him that he was from Libya and he was well experienced in kidnapping people for ransom. So through the media, Rob Matthews pleaded with the kidnapper to let Leigh go. He further tells the kidnapper that he and his family have gone through hell because of this ordeal. Of course, the media went on a rampage. They were reporting and seeking answers. I remember how South Africans were stunned at this point of finding out that a girl had been kidnapped for ransom. So after about 40 hours of Leigh Matthews' kidnap, the Matthews once again held a second press conference. And this time, Rob Matthews was frustrated and extremely angry. And he asked, what sort of people do something like this to other people? He said, even bad people must have some feelings. At this point in time, the South African police decided to increase the manpower from 15 policemen to 150 policemen. So with the 24-hour joint operation lines that were open, even psychics called in to tell them where they can find Leigh Matthews, and every lead was followed by the 150 policemen, as well as other tips that they were getting through these phone calls. They followed through, and unfortunately, none of them came to fruition. So during the investigations, the police triangulated Leigh's phone and it bounced between 3 towers in a place called Walkerville. So Walkerville is an open veld, but surrounded by a lot of plots of lands. Choppers and cadaver dogs were released in search of Leigh Matthews. Unfortunately, Leigh Matthews was not found in Walkerville. On the 21st of July, that is 12 days after Leigh Matthews was kidnapped, a municipal man was working the field in Walkerville when he came across a naked body of a white girl, and he immediately ran to a nearby tavern and called the police. And indeed, the police came along with detectives and they cordoned off 50 meters of the area of where the body was found, and indeed they confirmed that this was the body of the missing Leigh Matthews. Leigh Matthews had been shot 4 times on the head. I don't understand what monster does that to another human being. 4? That's a monster. So when the police got to Leigh Matthews' body, they discovered that her body was in the early stages of decomposition. There were no signs that animals had encountered with the body of Leigh Matthews at the time it was found, but a single funnel spider had started weaving its web between Leigh Matthews' legs. So it was clear that Leigh Matthews' body was not there for a very long time, because when the municipal worker, I think his name was Elliot, when he was asked by the police if the body was there the previous day, Elliot had said, "No, I passed this area the previous day and there was no body here." And indeed, the evidence does show that Leigh Matthews was not killed there, because there was no blood found around where Leigh Matthews' body was found. So the detectives ruled that the place where Leigh Matthews' body was found as a dumping site. So after the detectives were done with investigating and also clearing off Leigh Matthews' body, they proceeded to go to the Johannesburg Central Police Station, where Leigh Matthew and Sharon Matthew had been the entire day, receiving tips from the phone calls that they have set up. And without even saying much to them, they already knew that Leigh had been found, and unfortunately she was no longer alive. I can just imagine. I can imagine. I can only imagine. And that is when the blame game started. When the Matthews woke up the following day, there were headlines in newspapers blaming Rob Matthews for the death of his own daughter, saying that if he had paid the full amount, Leigh would still be alive. So the recovery operation was dismantled and the negotiators were also asked to leave, because now it was a murder investigation. A month after the discovery of Leigh Matthews' body, the police still had not found anything that may link anyone to the kidnap and murder of Leigh Matthews. So on the 24th of August 2004, the Matthews family decided to hire a private investigator by the name of Pete Belfeld. Now, Pete Belfeld was known to be a very thorough private investigator, and he has gotten a lot of hardcore criminals behind bars and serving long sentences. So Pete had an investigation routine that he always followed in order for him to catch the people that he was after. One thing he did not do, he never went to the boxes filled of documents and statements and all that stuff that police would do in order to follow up and investigate a case. His was totally different, and you're about to find out what he did. So the first thing that Pete Belford did was to go back to the crime scene, and that is Bond University parking lot. As I've mentioned earlier on, that the Bond University premises were highly secured. In order to enter the Bond University premises, you needed to be a student with a student card that you would produce to the security, or you would sign in at the gate before entering the premises. So when Pete got to Bond University, the first thing he asked for was the register where people signed in order to get in, and everybody that had signed in that particular day, the 9th of July 2004, were questioned and cleared off. So once everyone has been cleared on the register, Pete started thinking what would be the next thing that he would have to do. So in his mind, he said, okay, If Leigh had been taken from here, she must have definitely taken by a person she knew. So Pete decided to investigate all of Leigh's friends and classmates. And that is when he said it's possible that Leigh was kidnapped by a fellow student. Remember Rob when the kidnapper got angry with him for passing the drop-off point? He spoke in a particular accent. So Pete calls Rob again and say, what is the one distinctive thing you remember when you spoke to the kidnapper? And Rob told Pete that when he accidentally passed the drop-off point, the kidnapper called him and angrily shouted at Rob for passing the drop-off point. He picked up what sounded like an Indian accent. So Pete then decided to once again go back to Bond University's enrollment center and check out the student roll, and he sifted out all the Indian descent students, and one particular student stood out, a 24-year-old Indian male by the name of Donovan Moodley. And that is when Pete Belfeld began to look into Donovan Moodley's background to check if he had committed any other crimes before that are similar to the kidnapping of Leigh Matthews or of extortion or anything around that type of crime. Belfeld discovered that Donovan Moodley lived with his parents in Alberton, Johannesburg, and he came from not so wealthy but wealthy family. But when he looked at the wealth status of the Matthews and the Moodley family wealth, it was discovered that actually the Moodley family had more money than the Matthews family. Which kind of like made me wonder, why would Donovan do something like that if he came from a wealthy family? After all, he is at Bond University. Is it greed? Stupidity? Hatred? What the hell? Pete discovered that Donovan Moodley had been registered with the Bond University since the beginning of 2004, and he was studying the exact same courses as Leigh Matthews. The third thing that Pete discovered about Donovan Moodley was the fact that before he went to Bond University, for the past 3 years, he had worked for a company in its finance department. Unfortunately for Donovan, the company had to fire him for suspected fraud. Unfortunately, the company did not have enough evidence, or maybe they did not want to open a case of theft because they did not want to end up in the media or frighten off their clients. So they decided to just let him go quietly. And that is when Donovan Moodley decided to proceed with his studies by attending Bond University. Even at Bond University itself, it is reported that Donovan Moodley was not interested in education. Even when he was writing examination, he would come into the examination room and he would write his name, his student number, and he would not answer the question paper. So basically, I'm not sure what he was doing there. Maybe because of his he was thinking of making easy money by kidnapping and making money out of these wealthy kids. At Bond University, no one knows. So the next move that Pete did was to check around in the vicinity of Morningside and Bond University if there was any motel or hotel that could have been possible hideout for Donovan Moodley, and voila, indeed Donovan Moodley had checked himself in a motel called Formula One, which was very close to Bond University. So at Formula One, Donovan Moodley gave all his real details, that includes his name, his surname, and ID, as well as his plate number of his vehicle. So he had booked his hotel room for 8 days. So he had checked in on the 6th of July. Leigh Matthews was kidnapped 3 days later on the 9th of July 2004. And interestingly, on the 9th of July, Donovan Moodley does go back to the Formula One motel at around 9 p.m. That evening. He kidnapped Leigh Matthews and stayed there overnight. And that particular night, Donovan Moodley had used his credit card to pay for the room. Pete's next step was to look into Donovan Moodley's credit card records. And boy, did he find some telling tales. So before I go on, Donovan Moodley had a business partner where they would take pool tables and place them at various taverns in order to make money. That business does not make that much money because not every person in taverns play pool, and so the money that maybe he would make per month would not exceed more than 1,500 or 2,000 rand for that matter. But that's keep in mind. So Pete discovered that Donovan Moodley had made 3 large deposits into his credit card in the month of July. So on the 15th of July 2004, Donovan Moodley deposited 17,000 rand into his credit card. And on the 27th of July, he deposits another amount of 14,000 rand and 4,000 rand into his credit card. And Pete further investigated and found that Donovan Moodley also owned a motorbike and a gun that was registered into his name. And the gun was a 9mm pistol, and it's the same kind of gun that was used in killing Leigh Matthews. Unfortunately, Donovan's motorbike was damaged and it needed 38,000 rand to repair. So on the 28th of July 2004, Donovan Moodley calls the dealer and let them know that he does not have 38,000 rand because a deal went wrong. Therefore, he cannot pay the 38,000 rand. Instead, he can only afford to pay 16,000 rand towards the repair of his motorcycle. Now, because Donovan Moodley was a regular customer to this motorcycle dealership, so the dealership accepted the 16,000 rand instead of 38,000 rand. And another thing that Pete discovered about Donovan Moodley, the moment after he got paid, on the following day, he went on a shopping spree. And this is what he did. Let me read it to you. Donovan Moodley went and bought designer shoes, ate at expensive restaurants. He even spent 1,000 rand at a car dealership. After a month of Leigh's kidnap and murder, Donovan Moodley decided to take his girlfriend Yashika Singh together with her family members to Durban, and Donovan Moodley hired a yacht where they sailed along the shores of Durban during a sunset, and that's when Donovan Moodley went on his knee and proposed marriage to his girlfriend, who said yes. Of course, Yashika Singh had no idea all about this stuff that is going on in the sudden wealth. She had no clue where it all came from. Maybe because he plays the lotto, she thought he must have won. So at a later stage, it was discovered that Donovan Moodley used the ransom money to buy Yashika the engagement ring. And here's another interesting thing. When Leigh Matthews' car was found, a lotto ticket that had Donovan Moodley's fingerprint on was found in Leigh Matthews' car, which strengthened the case that indeed Donovan Moodley was the one responsible with the kidnap and murder of Leigh Matthews. I couldn't be happier with this evidence. There's something that my mom always said to us, that a human blood always talks. I never understood what that meant until I started taking an interest in true crime, and I realized that if you are going to kill someone, this person is not dead. That person that you killed will always help the police, will give police clues in order for you to get caught. So they will make you make some silly mistakes. For example, Donovan Moodley forgot a lotto ticket that he had purchased that had his fingerprint, and that ticket was in Leigh Matthews' car. So of course Leigh Matthews was helping the cops to catch her killer. That is what my mom meant when the human blood does talk. So if you are planning on killing somebody, just know that their blood will tell on you. Also in Leigh Matthews' car, they found a duct tape, once again, with Donovan Moodley's fingerprints on it, which confirms that Donovan Moodley kidnapped Leigh in her own car. And we're going to find out a little bit later how Donovan Moodley got to kidnap Leigh. So during Pete's investigation, he discovered that Donovan Moodley could not have been the only person that was involved in the kidnap and killing of Leigh Matthews. He strongly believed that 2 or 3 more other people were involved. So one of Pete's routine is not to go and arrest the perpetrator immediately. He wanted to get the full picture of who the perpetrator is and convince that indeed this is the right person that committed this crime, and then he goes and arrests them. So the other step that Pete followed was to look into Donovan Moodley's cell phone records, and he discovered that Donovan Moodley's cell phone directly lined up with that of Leigh Matthews, and possibly with Leigh Matthews herself. Donovan Moodley's cell phone was also discovered that during the time he held Leigh Matthews, he had called several friends. And at a later stage, Pete Belfeld does say that he does know the names of the people that Donovan Moodley had communicated with during the course of Leigh Matthews' kidnapping, but he does not have evidence enough to get them arrested, prosecuted, and convicted. And he admits that haunts him all the time. And interestingly, Donovan Moodley's cell phone also was caught at the drop-off point at the time Rob Matthews had come to drop off the 50,000 rand. Furthermore, upon the cell phone records investigation, Pete also discovered that Donovan Moodley had made calls to his business partner, his girlfriend's sister's boyfriend. He also called him. He also called his fiance on that particular day, and he also went to Lens, which is nearby Walkerville, to visit a friend. And an additional information that the coroner gave Pete was that Leigh Matthews' body seemed to have been kept in a fridge or a freezer to preserve her body from decomposition. Why? Because Leigh Matthews' feet had been found to have frostbites. Pete believed that Leigh was killed within moments after being kidnapped or after she had spoken with her mother, and most likely before the ransom was dropped. So indeed, she was kept somewhere for 12 days before she was dumped at Walkerville open felt, where the municipal worker discovered her body. So it's also possible that Leigh Matthews' body had been in that open felt for just a few hours. It's possible that she was dumped during the wee hours of the morning. No one knows. And here's an important and interesting point. One of Donovan Moodley's friends owned a mortuary or a morgue, and upon the investigation of Leigh Matthews' murder, the very same mortuary had closed down. I'm not saying anything. All I'm saying is it's suspicious. But when investigations concluded at that mortuary, they discovered that there is no trace that Leigh Matthews had been kept there. So after Pete was satisfied with all that he has collected during his investigation, he then proceeded to go and arrest Donovan Moodley. So on the 4th of October 2004, Pete decided to go and arrest Donovan Moodley at his home. So they parked outside of his mother's house and waited for Donovan Moodley, who used to go to the gym around 5 p.m. Just as he left the house, they pounced on him and handcuffed him. So just before they took him away, Donovan Moodley asked Pete and the investigating and the arresting officers if he could speak to his mother. So when he went to speak to his mom, he dropped to his knees as if he was going to pray and asked for forgiveness. He told his parents, "I have murdered somebody, and that someone is Leigh Matthews." Of course, his parents were hysterical, especially his mother, who even said to him, Donovan Moodley, "This girl, I've been praying for her every single night for her to be returned to her family, and my own child is responsible for the kidnap and murder of the same girl that I've been praying for." So one of the things that you should understand about Donovan Moodley's parents, Donovan's father is a pastor of a Baptist church, and his mom was the pastor's wife and was responsible for things at the church or something of that nature. So while Donovan Moodley was getting arrested, he looked at Pete and asked him, "What took you so long? I've been expecting you." Then Donovan admitted to Pete that the day he saw on the news that the Matthews family had hired him to investigate the kidnap and murder of Leigh, he knew that his days as a free man were numbered. So as Donovan Moodley was being whisked away in the police car, he immediately confessed to the kidnap and killing of Leigh Matthews. So it turns out that Leigh knew Donovan Moodley. So on the day of her kidnap, Donovan Moodley asked Leigh if he could please give her a ride and drop him at a certain point. So before Leigh gave Donovan the lift, she quickly told him that at 10 o'clock she needs to meet her mom so she can give her her credit card back, and then they can proceed to go to drop him wherever he needed. But when Donovan Moodley heard that Leigh was going to meet up with her mother, so I'm assuming he immediately proceeded to kidnap Leigh by pointing a gun against her head before they met her mother, and that's how Leigh Matthews was kidnapped. So he says that he pointed a gun at Leigh and told her to drive to a secluded area. When they got to this secluded area, he then bound Leigh and gagged her and threw her at the boot of her vehicle and drove back to campus. When they got to campus, he just hung there for a while until the parking lot was cleared. And when the parking lot of the Bond University was cleared, he then removed Leigh from her own car into his own car, and that's when he drove with Leigh Matthews to Walkerville. So this is where, when Sharon Matthews called Leigh on her phone, Donovan Moodley answered the phone and then told Sharon that he has her daughter and he wants money in order to release her. And later on, he started communicating with Rob Matthews and also threatened Rob that if he does not pay the 300,000 rand, he is going to kill Leigh. So according to Donovan Moodley, everything took place there in Walkerville. So when Pete asked Donovan, so why then did you kill Leigh after you've gotten the ransom money? He said that because the story was making the rounds on the newspapers and on television, he got scared and he had no any other choice but to kill her. I personally don't think that. I think by the time the Matthews family had called the media, Leigh was already cold. He said that before he killed Leigh, he made her undress and then he wrapped a blanket around her. The reason why he asked her to remove her clothes was because he wanted to hide evidence that might link him to the kidnap and murder of Leigh. So while they were waiting for Rob to come and drop the ransom money, Donovan says that he and Leigh had a very decent conversation. I'm supposing Leigh was trying to tap into his human side of things, and while they were talking, Leigh asked Donovan if she could use the toilet, and so Donovan allowed her to leave the car and to go and release herself in a nearby tree. So while Leigh was squatting, I'm not sure what exactly she was doing, whether number one or number two, Donovan then came from behind her and shot her in the head. And then he fired 3 more shots just to make sure that she was dead. Now, the part that irks me, that gets me angry, is the fact that here's a nice girl. She's talking to you in a civil manner and trying to tap into your humanity. And then while at her most vulnerable, you pump a bullet into her head, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4. What kind of a human being are you? I don't get it. I just don't get it. I don't get it at all. How do you do that? You're a monster. So Donovan says while he was watching the news, he heard that Leigh had a tanzanite ring that she had put in her back pocket of her jean. So he drove back to the spot where he burnt Leigh Matthews' clothes and buried it in the ground. He went and dug up the clothes, and indeed he did find the tanzanite ring. He took it and hid it in his CD covers in his bedroom. When Pete proceeded to ask Donovan, where exactly did you kill Leigh? He said, at the spot where you found her. Of course, Pete Battlefield did not believe a word that Donovan was telling him about the site where Leigh was killed, because the coroner had already told him that Leigh's body had been preserved in a refrigerator or a freezer for the duration of the time that she was being sought, and that the Walkerville area was a dumping site. To this very day, Donovan Moodley has not revealed where exactly Leigh Matthews was killed and which particular day that she was killed. The speculation or the calculation of the coroner was that Leigh had been killed 2 days after she was kidnapped. So she's been preserved for the past 10 days and dumped on the 10th day, few hours before she was discovered. So it's very important to note that the first shot that went through Leigh's head was the fatal shot. That consoles me a little bit because at least she did not feel any pain. She did not also see it coming. So Donovan Moodley then took Pete and a team of officers to the area where he dumped Leigh Matthews' body, and then he showed them things that don't exist. After that, he then led Pete and the police to his mother's house, where he recovered the ring that he had taken, the tanzanite ring that he had taken from Leigh's clothes. And then he also wrote a letter to his parents where he basically apologized to them and told them that he has done something that was going to at least take him away from the family for the next 30 years. And in his mother's house, it was also where he handed over the murder weapon, which was his 9mm. So in 2005, Donovan Moodley stands trial at the Johannesburg High Court. And it is where he pleaded guilty to all the charges that were laid against him, that of kidnap, murder, extortion, as well as defeating the ends of justice. Donovan Moodley's trial only lasted 2 days. So in Donovan Moodley's pre-sentencing hearing, the experts that took the stand had testified that it's impossible that Donovan Moodley was the only person involved in the kidnap and murder of Leigh Matthews. They believe that at least 5 other people were involved, and these people possibly may go unpunished, and investigations need to go on until everybody is accounted for and held responsible for the kidnap and murder of Leigh Matthews. So after all the hearings and the trial, Donovan Moodley was finally convicted and sentenced to 40 years imprisonment, and he will be released when he turns the age of 65. Why not 100? The Matthews family were happy with the sentence and they felt that justice was done. Donovan Moodley's father took the stand in the pre-sentencing of Donovan, and he did not ask for lenience or reduction of sentence. All he did was to speak about the son that he raised, and he felt responsible for what Donovan Moodley had done to Leigh Matthews. I feel bad for them. Rob Matthews also took the stand and gave victims impact, where he said they are finding it really difficult to deal with the loss of Leigh Matthews and that they cannot accept that they will never see her again. So when Rob Matthews stood down from the stand, he went and shook the hand of Donovan Moodley's father, and at a later stage, Sharon Matthews said they felt really bad for Donovan Moodley's parents because they too lost a child. 2 weeks after Donovan Moodley's sentence, he launched an appeal, and at a later stage, he withdrew the appeal. In his appeal, he made mention that he was framed and that he was not alone indeed or something of that nature, but he later withdrew the appeal. So while Donovan Moodley was in prison, he decided to study, you guessed it right, law. And he became a qualified lawyer in prison, and in 2012 he launched yet another case where he wanted his trial to be retried because for some reason while he was planning in prison, he decided to tell a totally different story about how he was framed by Nigerians that he owed money to, and as a result they are the ones that got hold of his gun to kind of like replace the money that he owed them, and the Nigerians must have kidnapped and killed Leigh Matthews and they framed him. And unfortunately for him, the case was thrown out of court. But before he did that, in 2011, he went to the Constitutional Court to have his sentence overturned and maybe also get a retrial. Unfortunately for him, the Constitutional Court upheld his sentence and dismissed his application. Unfortunately for him, the courts said no, which actually they did the right thing, because in our society we cannot have a Donovan Moodley. Donovan Moodley himself, he is where he belongs, behind iron bars. So after Donovan Moodley was sentenced, Pete Belfield did not stop investigating the Leigh Matthews kidnap and murder, so he continued investigating Donovan Moodley, and he discovered that in his finances about 98,000 Rand was deposited into his account in January of 2004. So he concluded that Leigh Matthews was not the first person that he had kidnapped for ransom. So it's possible that he must have kidnapped someone else and he demanded maybe 100,000 Rand and he only managed to get 98,000 Rand of the money that he had asked for. But Donovan Moodley explained that no, the 98,000 Rand was from his pool table business. But now if you put two and two together and you actually look at the business, he only has 2 pool tables in 2 bars. How is it possible that in a month those 2 pool tables would generate him 98,000 Rand? So that is why they believe that that was not his first time that he had kidnapped someone for ransom. Remember, he had told Rob and Sharon that he is a professional Libyan kidnapper. So to this very day, Donovan Moodley has never said whom he worked with in kidnapping Leigh Matthews and also murdering her. But it is believed, even the judge that sentenced him, Lebaskafni, sorry, I butchered his name, said that it is highly possible that he had accomplices, and these accomplices need to get caught and brought to justice. So please let me know by commenting down below, do you think Donovan Moodley worked alone or he had accomplices? And if you think if he had accomplices, where do you think Leigh Matthews' body was kept? Was it kept at the closed morgue? I simply believe so. I think so. I'm not saying it was, but it's just me thinking and putting 2 and 2 together. You had a mortuary, a friend that had a mortuary, and when the investigation started, you closed the mortuary down. What were you hiding? Type of thing. All that we know is that Donovan Moodley did have a friend that had a mortuary. And when they were investigating the Leigh Matthews case, they closed the mortuary down. Why? Like, what are you hiding? So in conclusion, unfortunately, Donovan Moodley did not show any remorse, and he was also convicted of kidnapping, which was sentenced for 15 years, extortion 10 years, and they were running concurrently together with the 40-year imprisonment, which is kind of like life imprisonment, if you may put it that way, because life imprisonment in South Africa is 25 years. So yeah, 40 years is a life sentence, I suppose. A life was taken unnecessarily and greedily by a person. I still don't understand. You come from a well-off family and you still what is wrong with you, dude? What went wrong? You got two great parents. They took you to Bond University and you thank them by kidnapping and killing another human being? And on top of that, you show no remorse? Come on. No. So thank you so much, guys, for listening and watching my video about the horrendous kidnap and killing of a very beautiful, humble, kind-hearted Leigh Matthews. I hope something like this never ever happens again in South Africa. And since Leigh Matthews' case, we've never had another kidnap for ransom case. Like I said, it is not a South African crime, it is uncommon here in South Africa. And if anybody tries it, be rest assured that you are going to get caught. Technology these days has advanced. Even if you have a burner phone, you will still get caught. So I'm happy that South Africa is not that type of country. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Let's see each other again in my next video. So make sure to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so that you get notified every time I upload a new video. And please make sure to like, share, and comment, because this also will help this video to get seen by more people when the algorithm promotes the video. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.